Hey guys, Mr. E here, and today we'll be talking about a very deceptively simple topic, but yet one that I see a lot of players, both new and more intermediate, struggling with, and that is getting surrounded. Having enemies ambush you from all directions and completely trapping your movement can be a panic-inducing event for even more experienced players, and knowing what to do in the moment to get yourself out of that situation without getting beat down on the spot is definitely one of the most important survival skills in Dark Tide. So today I'll be going over the strategies and techniques that you can use to outwit hordes and turn yourself from a player who gets beat down in a second like this into a player who can survive, escape, and dispatch hordes with ease like this. Let's begin with some tips that players of all skill levels can use, and this is going to be especially applicable if you're a newer player and you don't yet have the sort of reflexes and the game sense to be constantly swiveling around and checking behind you. It's being appraised of exactly what you are fighting, keeping your eyes on the enemies. Obviously, if you can't see the enemies, you're not going to be able to tell a lot of times when attacks are coming, and therefore you won't be able to block or dodge. So we want to position ourselves so that we can always see the enemies in front of us. Now, if I just do this out in the open, what you'll see here is that these enemies very quickly are going to try to get around me to the sides. And if I stop to fight them for any amount of time, you see these guys out here that are trying to get the flank on me. That's because enemies have like positions around you where they're trying to stand in and melee you. And so if you just kind of naturally let them go, you can see they'll fill in a full circle. We don't want to let them do that. We definitely don't want to let them do that, because that's how you start getting surrounded. And that's the whole goal, is to prevent us from doing that specifically. So one guaranteed way to stop yourself from being surrounded is to prevent yourself from being surrounded by sort of blocking yourself out with a wall. If you have a wall or some sort of terrain next to you, the enemies simply can't stand in the wall. So on this sort of layout here, there's a maximum of 180 degrees where these enemies can actually stand in order to hit me, which greatly reduces the amount of enemies that can attack me at the same time, but also more importantly, it makes it so that I can see pretty much every enemy, even though they'll still get around me to a pretty wide angle here. And if you're playing on console or with a lower FOV, I recommend, if you're playing on PC, by the way, to max out your FOV and just get used to that. What you might also need to do is start to move in a direction. And you'll see here that when I have all of these enemies in front of me, if I start to move in a direction, they trail behind me. They're still trying to catch up and get ahead of me and surround me, but they can't quite. So this allows me just to engage with just a couple enemies at a time, and I can take my sweet time and whittle them down. And this is the same way you'd engage with enemies through, say, like a door frame or something like that, where you don't really have to worry about fighting very many enemies, and then if there's any trappers or gunners, they are just visible as they're coming up this way as well. So you can see here, even with a very narrow, small field of view, I would be able to see every enemy that's coming at me, and only about 3 to 5 enemies are going to be able to swing at me at any given time, which is definitely manageable. If you can't yet manage 3 to 5 enemies at a given time, I think that there might be some more training required for you in the future. So just get out there and keep playing, and practicing. But once you've sort of got that prerequisite level, this is a really, really effective strategy to reduce the odds, sort of make the odds way more in your favor, since these enemies pretty much have to like 3v1 you instead of 100v1ing you. Integral to this strategy of keeping all of the enemies on the screen where you can see them and predicting their movements is going to be dodging, because in order to keep speed enough that we can outpace these enemies while going in reverse, we will need to pepper in dodges. But dodges are fickle things. As you use them, there's a slight delay before they start to come back, and if you use too many at once, you can run out of dodges and start to do these very small dodges that will struggle to keep you ahead of enemies, or worst case yet, you'll end up having a really small dodge when a massive attack is coming your way and get absolutely slammed. So we need to just be aware of when is the right time to throw out a dodge in order to use them judiciously. And that is just a matter of experience. I like to watch for enemies that are trying to get that flank on me. So as I'm falling back here, I can even stop and block, maybe even parry some of these enemies. But as I see some enemies that I'm losing off the side of my screen, then I'll throw out a dodge, just enough to get them back in the field of view. And you can even throw out a shove at the same time to get those enemies to back off and get them back into the nice area where we can see everything they're doing and not be off-screen ambushed. Now let's talk about the absolute bread and butter of horde survival, and it's something I just mentioned, which is the noble shove. The shove is the #1 underutilized mechanic in this game, in my opinion, and it is underutilized because players don't understand why and when they should be doing it. And if you watch some of my gameplay, I'll show you a little clip here.
Back out.
He says, run! Fair enough. Listen, you don't gotta tell me twice. Make space for you, Mr. Mrs. Hellboy. You'll notice that when I'm engaging enemies in melee combat, I seldom, if ever, actually let them hit my block like this. That's because blocking blocks the single individual enemy who hits your block and takes stamina. Much better for us to actually just spend that stamina ahead of time and put out a shove. A shove will do the same thing to most minor enemies, non-elite enemies, and knock them out of whatever animation they're currently doing, preempting the attack ever landing in the first place. And it's better 100% of the time to preempt those attacks unless you are going for a build that specifically gains benefits from actually blocking an attack, such as Arbides has some of these sort of talents. So if we can go ahead and shove these enemies, instead of letting them land the attack, just give them a shove, we will still consume stamina, just like we would if we let the block land, but we'll be stopping all of the enemies that are hit by that shove. And as you can see, if I get into the middle of the horde here, the shove not only hits all enemies in front of me, but it can also hit enemies behind you. And it's a smaller radius behind you, but it still does knock the enemies that are behind you out of their animations. So as you grow in skill and as you understand more about the enemy swing timings, what you'll be able to do is stand in the middle of a horde and do something like this and stall for a very, very long amount of time before the enemies can actually hit you. Now, that's easy enough to do in third person when you can see the enemies that are swinging behind you, but trust me, as you gain experience, you'll kind of learn to play this more like a rhythm game where you know that these enemies around here have about like, I'd say a 3/4 second timing before they can throw another attack, and therefore I need to be shoving on this sort of tempo in order to avoid most attacks landing. And you only really have to get yourself concerned when the enemies start throwing attacks at all different times. Now, the other really great reason to be shoving in a horde situation like this is because, of course, it pushes enemies away from you radially. So all these enemies that are now blocking me and I can't make my way through, I'm just not able to make it through here. If I shove them a couple of times, it'll make spaces and I can get myself out, right? And I could also be throwing in dodges there to get out even faster through the cracks. So just shoving is going to be a great way to get out, and you won't have to worry about blocking too much because most enemies will be interrupted. Now, this game can be really easy against certain types of enemies. These are probably, I would say, like intermediate enemies, just regular bruisers. You could also have a really easy mix of horde, like the weakest hordes possible that have just like these sort of guys, little poxwalkers. These guys have such slow attack animations that I only need to shove like once every 1.5 seconds or so. I'm not really worried about taking very many attacks from them. They attack so slow. These guys are intermediate. And then at the upper end of the difficulty spectrum is when you start to get mixed hordes. When you start to get really threatening enemies who are mixed in here, right? So now there's a crusher in the mix. Obviously, my little dinky ass shove isn't going to do anything against him. So in the meantime, when I'm shoving all these enemies and keeping them off of me, I also have to be keeping aware of what the hell he's about to do, because he's going to do his thing no matter what. And that means that the game just got way more complex than it was a second ago. And that's where you can start to use some of your class's abilities, like your charge, whatever it is, in order to level the playing field, or of course just use your class resources to go in and remove those priority threats like ASAP, because of course they're going to cause tons and tons of problems for you to be mixed in there. And that goes the same for having trappers or flamers or dogs or whatever else in that horde as well. Just try to, while you're shoving those enemies back and you have the brain space because you can, you have like a second where these enemies can't attack you because they're shoved back, be scanning, be looking around and seeing if there are any threats that are mixed into this horde that, like a rager or a mauler, that might not be vulnerable to being shoved, and that you will need to be ready to actually attack and fend off when they come in to threaten you. Now, I know a lot of the tips I gave so far are for more intermediate or beginner players, so thanks for sticking it out this far. If you're a more experienced player, I promised I'd save you something good for last year, and this is the most advanced tactic that I'll be talking about here today. This one should be something that you are working on all the way from your beginning of your learning process all the way till end game. And the sooner you can understand exactly what you're looking for with this tactic, the sooner you will start to get a lot of value out of it. And if you can master this, you will have a truly, truly OP skill in the Tide series of games. This skill is going to allow you to basically tell when enemies are behind you without hearing them or seeing them, which is kind of crazy sounding, right? Because let's look in this situation. There are enemies behind me here. However, my attention needs to be here. There's a trapper, there's a mauler, there's a whole horde. I can't be looking away from what's going on here. Now, normally, how would I tell if there's enemies behind me were attacking? Well, the game is supposed to play an audio cue that lets me know that there's an attack incoming. However, it's kind of unreliable at best. So what I'm going to do for the sake of this demonstration, personally, I'm taking off my headphones. You will still hear the sound because who wants to sit in silence for a couple minutes, but I won't be able to hear when these enemies are attacking. And I'm not going to look at them either. So how am I going to tell when the enemies are behind me in order to get out of the way of them in order to counter their attacks? I'm going to feel for them. This is the advanced tactic I'm talking about. This is the OP tactic. I'm going to be feeling for enemies. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to be constantly on the move. When you are engaging with a melee horde, just be constantly dodging. Be constantly shifting around. Never stand in one spot. Never let the enemies approach you. Be moving around because you never know when you might bump into an enemy who happens to be in your blind spot. And just by the simple act of bumping into them, a very skilled, adept player can tell. Look at this. Could you tell there's an enemy behind me? I can feel where that enemy is physically. I can feel this enemy is on my left side, right? Just by that subtle camera shift, and now he's on my right side. That is a skill that if you pay attention to how your character normally moves and where your reticle is and stuff like that, and you see that sort of subtle shift, or you get blocked just at the end of an animation, like that, you'll know there's something there without it having to attack you, without even looking at it. And that will give you all the information you need to throw an attack in that direction and get rid of them before you even need to give a moment's notice. And so that's a skill that you can work on for thousands of hours and hone, and it allows you to throw out blind attacks at enemies that are there without having to waste any time looking at them and tracking their animations or whatever it is. So what I'm going to do in this encounter, as I said, sound is off for me. I'm just going to be focusing right over here, and I'm going to let those enemies come up behind me, and I'm going to deal with them as they come, because hopefully I'm going to feel them as they come. I want to get that mauler out of the way. Oh, I see a trapper. Did I hit him? No. And of course, dealing with trappers like that, let's go ahead and just get into this. Shove my way through here. Get off me. I'm coming for you. Oh, she ran. Okay, well, let's finish this off. And there you go. Simple as that. So yeah, understanding where enemies are is absolutely key to not being surrounded. If that wasn't clear from the beginning, right? The beginner strategies are, of course, to position yourself so that you can always see all enemies, but the game doesn't really play to those rules. The game is going to try its absolute best to surround you, and as you get to higher and higher difficulties, it's going to try harder and harder to spawn more and more enemies on off angles, out of side spawn doors, out of the rear and front spawns. Hell, you can even have them like dropping down on top of you sometimes. times. And Lord even knows what they're going to introduce for like new enemies or specials this year. What if we get like a cloaked enemy or something, right? So these skills hopefully will help you guys stay safe when there's hordes on the field and stop yourselves from getting surrounded and beat down into a pile of bloody pulp. Thanks for watching, guys. Really appreciate you. Like and subscribe. See you next time. Bye-bye.